This meeting to order. Welcome back to meeting number 80 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today we are meeting in public to discuss committee business. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. And now, when we suspended on Wednesday, November the 22nd, Mr. Bruson had the floor, and we had resumed debate on the sub-amendment of Mr. Falk. Just to remind colleagues, we have a motion on the floor. We have an amendment that was made. We now have a sub-amendment by Mr. Falk, and we are resuming through our speaking order. Mr. Bruson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to be able to take a moment to speak about this sub-amendment that was proposed, as you said, by Mr. Falk. The sub-amendment is to add a specificity to witnesses being called from one riding as part of a study that's proposed within an amendment to our study. I actually trust that all members of this committee will make decisions to call everyone that we need to be heard as part of our study of offshore wind and Atlantic Accords in C49 and sustainable jobs in C50. So I don't think that we need to be naming specific ridings. There are 338 ridings, all of which may have really important witnesses to call to it. So I will not be supporting this sub-amendment. I think that we have, throughout all of our studies, been able to very well call the witnesses that need to be heard for a study, and there's a process for that. I will say that we are now, I was checking, trying to figure out where the location for this meeting was, and realized I had to look back to October 30th. This is actually a continuation of our October 30th meeting. That's basically a month that we have been at the stage of continuing to debate essentially the sub-amendment, and it has been a long wait. So I'm happy to see that today I have been given the floor, because I know that people in our communities are eager to see us study the offshore wind with C49 and sustainable jobs in C50, and that this is a moment for us to move forward. Both of them provide economic opportunities for our country, and so I'm calling, this is a really nice morning to see us be able to actually get into the debate of the sub-amendment and to talk about how we can move forward with a concurrent study of these two bills. I'm looking forward to doing it, and I'm hoping that we can keep this pace going forward so that we can all move forward with these very important bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard.
Quick point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Just wondering if you could just enlighten the committee as to what the next 4 or 5 speakers is for the sub-amendment here. That would be beneficial to the committee. Thank you.
We do have, and as mentioned previously, colleagues, the speaking order can change if members are present or not present, or if people waive their wanting to speak at that point in time. But after Mr. Bruson is Monsieur Simard. After Mr. Simard is Mr. Aldag. After Mr. Aldag is Mr. Genis. And then I have several others from, I believe, everybody from your side also on the speaking list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur Simard, the floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you. As my colleague Julie has pointed out, we seem to be really prevented from moving forward since the 30th of October, a full month trying to figure out who has speaking rights, who is going to finish the discussion about a sub-amendment that, looks like something out of Charlie. I'm not a fan of all this approach, something to the effect of, Charlie, we are going to bug you and get in the way, Charlie Angus, if you want to bring people in from your riding. My son is studying political science. He's listening to the debate, and the idiotic procedures that he's observed over the last weeks have actually been discussed in one of his classes about how to paralyze a democratic system, sometimes based on very questionable aims. Why am I bringing this up, Chair? Because people are watching us carry out this debate. I know this as a fact because I myself have taught, but certainly taught political economy and politics, and I can tell you that cynicism is on the rise. What's been going on here over the last month certainly contributes to that. I certainly don't agree with everything in C-50, nor do I agree with everything in C-49. We indeed voted against in the House. But on what sort of basis can I try, therefore, to paralyze a study in a committee? If I were to do that, I think this would be totally irresponsible on my part. Therefore, I won't head down that lane, but I will rather try to improve the bills in order, perhaps, that they eventually do become acceptable to me and I will no longer have to vote against them. That's the principle of the workings of democracy. So I hope we'll be working very quickly on this amendment because indeed I don't actually see what it's bringing to the table. We can indeed invite any witnesses to come and testify. It's up to us as MPs to suggest witnesses. So this sub-amendment seems to have no effect whatsoever other than to make us waste more time. I would like all colleagues to show good faith so that we can move forward, hear witnesses, and allow democracy to move forward. I therefore invite us all to vote as quickly as possible on the sub-amendment and get back to the topic at issue, being our undertaking study of two bills that are important bills, even if we don't agree with them in their entirety. I encourage us all to take this path forward. Everything we do is leaving a mark on our society. People see us. People hear us. People can refer back to what's been going on for the past weeks. It's really been an arm wrestling match to see who has the floor and so on. I don't think this is a very good way to support democracy or democratic process. So let's remain responsible and let's work on the amendments before us and let's stop wasting precious time.
Merci, Monsieur Simard.
Thank you, Mr. Simard.
We'll now go to Mr. Aldag. Mr. Aldag, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a wonderful thing to be able to speak, and that's something that we haven't had a lot of opportunity to do. So I am grateful that we are able to weigh in on the sub-amendment that we have today, as well as the amendment and ultimately the main motion. I, like my two colleagues before me, would like to encourage us to try to move forward as expeditiously as possible. We have two very important pieces of legislation before us. And I'm hearing from thousands of Canadians in my constituency office about the importance that they see in C-49 and C-50. And there's an appeal that we get on with this, that we, and in large part, that we make room for Labour at the table. I need to reflect that it is interesting how our Conservative colleagues, particularly the leader, talks about being a friend with Labour, and yet every chance that he and his caucus have to prevent things from moving forward, they seem to take that opportunity. We're seeing it with C-58, we're seeing it with C-50. And so I really would hope that we have this important legislation before us, and I'd like to see us actually move forward for the benefit of Canadian workers. We've heard lots of discussion about whether this is a programming or a schedule motion, and I'd like to remind all colleagues here that the motion that we have, the original motion, when we finally get to that, will allow us to deal with both C-49 and C-50 concurrently. And I think that's a really wise way to go. It would allow us to have in witnesses, the minister and others, to deal with both pieces of legislation so we can get them back to the House in a timely manner. And so I won't take up a lot more time other than to say that I'm ready to move forward with the vote on the sub-amendment and hopefully a vote on the amendments. We can get on to the main motion as soon as possible, and then we can build on work that our committee did previously on hearing from many witnesses on the C-50 legislation as well as C-49. We have provinces, Labrador, Newfoundland, as well as Nova Scotia, asking us to move forward with that piece of legislation as well. And so I think that the motion we have from my colleague is a very good motion that will help us advance both pieces of legislation, ultimately get them back to the House so the House can do its job and move forward with this legislation. So that's my intervention on the sub-amendment that we have before us this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Eldag. Ms. Jones, before I go to the next speaker, I just want to recognize you as you do have your hand up. Do you have a point of order?
No, I don't. I just wanted to get on the speaking list to speak to the amendment and to move forward with the bills that we need to debate.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a quick point of order. Now, obviously, Mr. Janis is not here, so I'm just curious to know, you had alluded to the fact that the next speakers after him were, it seemed like it was all on our side here, but I'm just curious to know if you could just give us the breakdown of who the next 3 or 4 speakers are.
Mr. Dreeshen. The next speaker, because Mr. Janis is not here, we go to Mr. Dreeshen. After Mr. Dreeshen, we go to Mr. Falk, and then we go to you, Mr. Patzer. And then I have Ms. Tubbs after that. Yeah, and then I have some other, okay? Mr. Dreeshen, the floor is yours. Thank you for waiting patiently. You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I too have been waiting for this opportunity to speak and to discuss some of the significant aspects of what we have before us, including, as other speakers have just mentioned, what the order should be as far as C-49 or C-50. Of course, I think what many people are aware of is the major concern with C-69, which of course is, and this affects all ridings. So it affects Timmins, it affects my riding, it affects every one of 338 ridings in the country, where the Supreme Court has found that there are aspects of C-69 that are unconstitutional. And we then look at C-49, which has, at an initial count, 33 references to the points in C-69, which have been deemed unconstitutional. Therefore, when the suggestion is made that maybe we should actually take a look at that which the Supreme Court said was so egregious before we as a committee, or for that matter, before a government decides to push forward with legislation that it knows is formed on something that has been challenged. So this, I believe, is the critical aspect of the discussion. So when we say there is something that the people of each of those 338 ridings need to be aware of, well, it is the court decision on those parts of C-69 that have been already made to the citizenry. And of course, how then can we justify dealing with legislation until that has been dealt with? So how is the government planning on dealing with that? We listened to the Minister of the Environment basically saying, well, I don't think they're right, so we'll just kind of shuffle it around a little bit so that you don't have to worry about that. Well, that isn't exactly what the Supreme Court suggested be the solution to the fact that these things, that these points were considered unconstitutional. We have seen since the same attitude, and the point I want to make has to do with attitude, and that is with the plastics ban, and again the Supreme Court saying that or the federal court, sorry, saying that too has remnants of it that are unconstitutional. Well, the suggestion is, well, we'll just run roughshod over that too. It's not an issue. And of course, then we come back to the stage where we say, well, yes, but this is natural resources. And so the fact that the Minister of the Environment chooses to get engaged in that discussion and so on, so maybe we should just deal with that, with what the Minister of Natural Resources has to say, because of course we've made reference to having both of them and even others to come to speak to the committee. I made a very significant point when I was on Environment Committee to take a look at the mandate letter of the Minister of the Environment. And then when I moved here to Natural Resources, I made a special point of looking at the mandate letter for the Minister of Natural Resources. I challenge people to find where the major differences are. So when we have a Minister of Natural Resources that is not been charged with finding the very best opportunities for every one of Canada's natural resources, when he is using the same set of metrics that he had when he was Environment Minister, or that when the new Environment Minister came into play, how does that become significant as far as natural resources is concerned? Now, we have heard through our discussions in the past that there are parts of their legislation that has been unfair. It has been unfair to regions. It has been unfair to provinces. And quite frankly, after the many years that I spent on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, it has been unfair to our Indigenous communities because they have a lot of money already in the game in natural resources. So then we talk about some of the other features of how this government looks at our natural resources and how we as a country can manage them. So I go back a number of years to a meeting with the OSCE in Berlin. At that time, there were discussions and different things taking place. And of course, the environment and science and technology was one of the main features that were there. Excuse me. The contribution that Canada brought to the table in an amendment to one of the major supplementary items that were being discussed on the floor of this 50-some odd country group, which is beyond the European Union, was that they wanted that group to more or less rubber stamp the fact that Canada believed that a carbon tax was the very best solution for managing environmental concerns. And so that was our contribution to this discussion. I mean, we had others that had some workings on helping women be involved in parliamentary associations and that type of thing, and for helping out journalists that were being attacked. And so there's a lot of other things there. But that was our contribution.
Question de règlement, Monsieur le Président, pardon.
Sorry?
Point of order.
Order by Mr. Smart.
Juste par curiosité.
Just a matter of curiosity here. I'd like to know how Mr. Dreeshen's speech here is linked in any way to the sub-amendment. I would just like him to explain that to us, because I myself can't see how what he's discussing is linked to the sub-amendment. This is just a friendly reminder here that that's what we're talking about, the sub-amendment. If you would like to discuss something else, perhaps we could wait till we're back to the main motion at least.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smart, for your point of order. I would just ask colleagues to keep the debate relevant to the motion at hand. Mr. Dreeshen, thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And I guess I could go back to the point where I said we have 338 ridings where this is significant. And we need to talk about the concerns that Canadians have, that regions have, that provinces have, about how things are dealt with. And we need to look at how industry is managing this. And the only way you can do that is to talk about the way in which government has put obstacles in the way of industry, have set up barriers where there is one part of the country working against another part of the country. So that is my rationale, and that is where I will continue from. So this contribution that we had in Berlin was one where, probably one of the first times where I had to sit there and say, I have to speak against this because this is not the best way, and it was obvious. It was simply presented to the group as window dressing to say, hey, this is what we're doing, so we'd sure like to have this other group on our side, to do this. And it is sort of it did pass. It is, especially at that time, so this was about 6 years or so ago, they were about as conservative-minded as they are now. So it did pass. And so therefore we could merely come back and say, well, look, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, it also believes that carbon tax is a significant part of this. Well, we have that in a couple of different regions. We have, for example, if you are going to be in the club of the European Union, you have to commit to some sort of engagement and development of having a carbon price, which kind of ties into that which Canada had said back a number of years ago in Berlin. So I can see where the argument, the discussion, I can't see why Canada would be the one pushing it, but I can see where that discussion would come into play. So we fast forward that to a McKinsey report that took place in 2019 that talked about carbon pricing in Europe and the engagement associated with that. I believe it was Poland that was at the rate of $1 per ton at that time. I think it was Sweden that was 159 or 179 at that time. And we had Ukraine at 38 cents. So that was it in 2019. And to be fair, in 2019, Canada's carbon price was $20. So there was a 56-to-1 ratio that was involved there. So yes, Ukraine had said, okay, to be part of this group, we're part of the carbon tax. You take a look at where we're at now, $60. I believe Ukraine is around 83 cents. So that is probably closer to a 75-to-1 ratio as far as the tax is concerned. So where does that put us? We know that we want to help. That's what the OSCE was about. It speaks about food security, energy security, and at that particular point in time, Russia's invasions into Georgia and other places, and Crimea as well, all of these things were discussion points. So we fast forward to Birmingham in 2022. Similar arguments, except at this time, Canada came with a plan for a transition away from hydrocarbons. Again, very confusing as to why probably one of the, well, actually the greatest developer of hydrocarbons on Earth would go there and with its hands up and say, handcuff us. We're ready to show just how committed we are, because we know how committed our environment ministry is and our natural resources and our prime minister is to respecting a signature that says if something's going to be done, it's going to be done by us first, and we will lead the charge. At that meeting, where we were presenting this, the Czech Republic had presented a motion more or less saying well, that's great. We want to talk about that. However, we would like to have respected the types of energy sources that we have in our boundaries so that we are not bound by such stringent rules that indicate how great it would be if the world could get off of hydrocarbons and how quickly they could get off of hydrocarbons. It was presented, and once again, the only way in order to make the changes that were associated with this amendment would have been, and there were a few other changes there, would have been if they had unanimous consent to do so. And once again, I feel badly, but I had to make sure that we did not have unanimous consent to do that. And I know that people whom I care about a lot probably looked at me and said, well, why are you doing that? And the reason is because here you had the Czech Republic, along with many other countries in Europe, that were saying with the conflict that we have here in Europe, we need every sort of fuel that we can. We need to go back and reconsider the plans to mothball nuclear. We have to, we know that we're going to be doing more deforestation. We have those areas that had oil and gas. They didn't want to upset the organization that they were with, but they did want to be respected. And that was the rationale and the reason for me having done what I did. It's difficult when you're kind of put into that position. And it's more difficult when you come from a part of the country where in the 15 years that I have been a member of Parliament, I remember the very first time when I was just running, and this guy came to me and said, I just want you to know that Alberta and Canada's oil and gas industry is the very best in the world. And that the only place that is coming close to it, and he said at that time, is Australia. And he said that is because they have taken that which we have done and they have implemented that into their procedures and regulations. That made me proud. And it made me proud to stand up for our Indigenous groups that were engaged with oil and gas. It made me proud to stand up for those in my community that work so diligently on oil and gas. And quite frankly, it gave me this sense of pride that I knew that I could go to other parts of this country as a member of Parliament and speak highly of what we did, and therefore speak highly of what they do, and that we could all work together because as Canadians, we are experts in that field, as we are experts in other fields. So that's what we're dealing with right now. And it saddens me to see, and I have looked at the last 5 or 6 years, and I have seen serious division. I've seen division between groups. The biggest thing that we do in this place, and it is something when I first got involved in politics, I said the worst thing you can do is to label people, to label groups, to label organizations, because that's cheap and easy, and it doesn't show that you actually care about knowing more about what is taking place. And I recall, again, when we think about Canada and how we can take our natural resources, I remember going to, I was part of Parlaméricas, and I remember going to Mexico. I believe we were in Mexico City. And we had at that time, we had the Bloc with us, we had the Liberals with us, and we had the NDP with us. Now, the fact that I might have said some things that were not exactly nice about the government in Europe, I suppose I learned that from some of my Liberal colleagues that were with me in Mexico City. But leaving that aside, I remember the person from the Bloc, and
Point of
what
order?
they said was this: I love Canada.
If I could ask you to pause
Certainly.
for a moment, please. Mr. Cervera on a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Cervera.
Just wanted to ask about Mr. Dushan. Very much enjoying hearing your thoughts on a lot of issues, but wanted to ask on this tangent here on the point of relevance, please. Thank you.
Thank you for your point of order, Mr. Cervera. I would just ask colleagues to ensure that we are staying focused on
Certainly.
the sub-amendment at hand and to make sure debate is focused on that. Mr.
Thank you very
Dushan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, as we speak about various parts of the country, whether it be provinces, whether it be regions, whether it be each and every one of our constituencies, this is the point as I wish to make, and I'm about to make it with regards to the dear friends that I had with me from the Bloc in Mexico City. As I said, the public comments were this: I love Canada. I love Quebec. Two great countries. I didn't see eye to eye with that part, but nevertheless, that was what was being said. And I realized that they wanted to make Canada strong because it gave them an opportunity to be strong within a Canada that was going to be able to go around the world and be beneficial, and that then they would be able to work well within that, and their aspirations on sovereignty and so on, because it was the Bloc, that would have gone someplace for them. Now, I listen to my friends from the Bloc, and their commentary is this: this country is so dysfunctional that we can't wait to get out of here. It's quite a change in 12 years from we love this country, we love your country, we want to work together because we can see that it's positive, to the labeling, the pitting one group against another, and believe me, it has done a lot of damage to this country. But I can see where the Bloc would deal with that and simply say, well, how do you expect us to want to be part of this group? You guys can't get along. East against West. Well, let's talk about a language against this and energy and the different types of energy. I would love to have us being able to work through with the energy that we have. So getting back to the natural resources side of it, I am happy that we are able to have hydropower and the great ability it is on this country to be able to have so much of our electricity coming from hydropower. Mm-hmm. The point that gets me, and many people have heard me say this, is those dams didn't just happen. The damage, the environmental damage that is associated with flooding vast sections of Canada in order to ensure that we have electricity is something I've always said. You have to measure the environmental impact from the first shovel you use to dig something up to the very last shovel you use to cover it up. And when it comes to hydropower, it's going to be a long time before we cover it up. But we should recognize that which is there. And I can go through all of the scientific aspects of it. I know a little bit about science, but I could go through all of that. But that's not my point. My point is the metrics of analysis. So when we then talk about, for example, nuclear. And again, dealing with this because we're part of natural resources. Thankfully, all of the discussions that we have had over the last number of months as we've had the nuclear industry here and they've been chastised for all of the different things and so on, finally, they got some recognition that if you want emissions-free electricity, then we shouldn't be damning the nuclear industry in the same way as we were putting the oil and gas industry in the crosshairs. So, thankfully that has happened. I'm happy to see that for many different reasons. But we still have this, and I hear it constantly by people that I know better that are saying, but what we must do is to minimize and get rid of our hydrocarbons. Well, when I fly to Vancouver, I take a look at where they load all of the coal, and I know where it's going, as does anybody else that flies in and out of Vancouver. But that's okay. But if you fly over Fort McMurray, that's not okay. All of this oil that has been seeping in to these rivers in northern Alberta for millennia that we've now put a stop to, so we collect it and then sell it around the world, has been demonized. And I kept telling people, and the oil and gas industries, they've hurt themselves with this because they felt, well, anybody would understand what we're doing and how much better we are doing it than any other place in the world. But they didn't do a very good job of selling that. And so therefore, it was easy for groups, especially from Europe, but certainly we have groups here in Canada, that basically said, the tar sands, which of course tar is something that you get from a process, it is not what we have there, but nevertheless, that the tar sands campaigns will be something that we can get a lot of money off of. And that is exactly what took place. And it took place for decades. Now, that's putting one group against another. And I know that these massive dams on these rivers are going to look like that for hundreds and hundreds of years. When a pit has been completed in Fort McMurray, within 40 years, you cannot tell the difference between it and any forest that there would be. Actually, after 20 years, you can't tell the difference, except the Alberta government won't allow a complete reclamation or whatever the term is until 40 years. But that's what you get in Alberta. You don't get that in Venezuela. You don't get that in Nigeria. You get it in Alberta. And yet I have to listen to different groups demonize the oil and gas industry in my province, or worse than that, in my country. And that's the part where I believe it is very important, which is the reason why when I look at what is happening with C-69, I believe it was rather important that we respect that process and we work from there. So those are some of the things that I believe that we should be paying attention to. And when we deal with talking about our own constituencies, I know that oil and gas found disfavor because it was easy to get money for environmental groups to demonize it. I look at our oil and gas, or I look at our agriculture area, and again, I've been a farm kid since I was born, and still continue to farm. I know that we have a tax on agriculture as well. And we do a great job. That's why when I was the OSCE, and we're talking about food security, and whether I've been in Asia Pacific and Parliamericas and so on, food security is critical. So I can tell them what we do in agriculture, the significance of Canadian agriculture and that which we sell. I also tie in, that's what we do with oil and gas. So the next part of it is this seemingly pass that we get, excuse me, this pass that we seem to get on the mining industry. Because here we have an opportunity to do mining for rare earth minerals and that type of thing. And we believe that the people that made all their money going against oil and gas, and the people that make their money going against conventional agriculture, are just going to let mining have this great pass. So that when we talk about that which is happening in Timmins, that, or in Sudbury, or in my riding, that don't worry about that. That's for the greater good. That's for electric vehicles, or that's for some other type of thing that we have. So we'll be fine. Just you guys stop with this hydrocarbon development, because we believe that that's a problem. And we believe that, being the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Natural Resources. And that is the reason why I am so concerned about the way in which we are going in this country. We are looking at ways in which we can pit one group against another. I do not believe that that will change with this present administration. And that is something that bothers me. I would think that somewhere along the line, people could look at what we do, what Canada does, be proud of it, and speak about the things that we do together, rather than people such as myself having to go to international fora, listen to our government talk about how embarrassed they are that we are a major oil and gas developing nation, and that with any luck, we'll be able to come up with another plan. So those are the things that concern me. Now, there are other aspects when we speak about NC50, the transition away from traditional oil and gas jobs, and how things are going to be so much better if we could just tie into the new world order that we see and be prepared for all of us to be able to use a new energy source and change our way of doing things. It takes me, well, averages, depending upon which way the Earth is turning, it takes 4 hours on average for me to get from Alberta to here to Ottawa. About the same amount of time as it takes if I wanted to fly to Mexico. Okay, but anyway, that's how long it takes. So we have 6 time zones in this country. We have, and when I look out the plane window, I see the amazing things that we have. The natural beauty, the water. I know that we have minerals there. I know the other things that are associated with it. And And I am proud of every part of this. My wife's family came from Prince Edward Island. They were there in the 1800s. It was mariners. I have a great sense of pride for that part and the Maritimes. I have friends of mine that I've gone to school with that are from Quebec. Great people, hardworking people. Ontario, all of the western provinces. I have, in my role with natural resource or with Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development, met some amazing individuals in that community that, believe me, I would tell people, if you want to find a CEO to come and work in your company, talk to these people. They understand what's going on. They know what is taking place. And that was my thought when I became an MP, is that we would find ways of bringing this country together and be proud of it, rather than finding ways of dividing. And sadly, we seem to make sport of that. And that is something that I feel is not holding us in good stead. And I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate in that I've spent time on Agriculture Committee. I've spent time on public accounts, so I understand how the funding of government goes. I also understand what happens when things go awry with government. As I said, the Agriculture Committee, but I've also been on international trade. So I know how important it is to trade our goods around the world. I know how well respected our goods are around the world. I know I've been in South America and talking to mining companies there that are Canadian, because we have a lot of Canadian mining companies. And yes, sometimes they take over a mining operation that was not looked after very well. And so we have groups here in Canada that attack them. But in general, I remember one group, and I believe it was in Colombia, that basically they made a point. They said, well, we need consultants, so here's how we're going to use our consultants. We're not going to take some American consultants to come down or somebody from Canada as a consultant. We're going to go to the local colleges in these countries, and we are going to bring these people to be our consultants so that they can have respect and talk to the priests, to community leaders, to government, and environmentalists, and farmers, and everything. That's how they're going to deal with that. And then they brought the groups together. And these companies, basically, Canadian mining companies, basically said, we needed to do that to gain trust. And that's what we did. Yet, at the same time, I remember here us having motions coming through the floor from the Liberals, basically criticizing our mining companies around the world. And by extension, then, that would be these ones that were doing a great job. So, yeah, it gets a little frustrating when the mindset is, let's be critical. Let's take a look at these things and find out just what it is that we need to do to minimize the efforts of expert Canadians. And the problem is, and again, I suppose I go back to my 34 years as a teacher, and math and physics and biology and chemistry, but primarily math and physics. We have preconceived notions of what is happening in the world. One of the books I've been looking at is called Factfulness. It's from Hans Rosling. And basically, he was a medical doctor as well as a statistician. And he goes through a series of questions that he would ask the public. Simple types of things. Basically, kind of, I'll just take an example, and I think you'd be curious to see this. Is, in all low-income countries across the world, how many girls finish the first 5 grades of school? So here is the options. A was 20%, B was 40%, C was 60%. So low-income countries around the world today, how many girls finish the first 5 grades of school? Now, I'm not a teacher anymore, so I'm not going to make a test out of it, but it's 60%. That isn't what the results were when they gave this question to the general public, or even to people that we depend on different organizations, worldwide organizations, or academics. They got less than what it would have been if they had randomly chosen it. Another question said, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty. The first was almost doubled. B, remained more or less the same. Or C, almost half. Well, most people think poverty is getting worse. But no, it's half of what it was before, because of different things that we've done. Life expectancy in the world. They had, for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. This is in the world. 70 years. That's what it really is. But my point to this, and I don't want to belabor it, but my point is that we have these preconceived notions that people such as myself, I grew up in the 60s, these were the things that we were all bombarded with. And so we have these preconceived notions of what is taking place. We teach teachers. The older ones teach the younger ones. Well, this is our preconceived notion of what is taking place in the world. So that is something that we present. But when you look at it statistically, we've been wrong. And so we have governments that bring together their sayers of sooth, but they're wrong. And so we make decisions and we make policies that are related to that. Now, about the only thing that they agree with, here's the 13th question. Oh, actually, I want to go to the 12th question. It says, how many people in the world have some access to electricity? So 20%, 50%, 80%. Well, it's 80% of the world that has access to electricity. Another says, how many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? A was 20%, B was 50%, C was 80%. Answer is 80%. We don't think that way. We don't look at those statistics. We believe the things that we are told through social media, through reports that we see on various news agencies. I won't go into ones that I think are somewhat a little bit off. The only one that seems like we got it right is global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will A, get warmer, B, remain the same, or C, get colder. Well, it is true that global climate experts believe that it will get warmer. Okay? Now, again, I mentioned that it was the 60s when I grew up. A little before that when I was born, but nevertheless. But I remember all of these different stages where, here is the next, ice age. Here is what is going to happen with their ozone layers. This is going to happen here. Everything is going to be flooded and all of these problems. We are going to have massive hurricanes. We are going to have massive forest fires. We are going to have all of these types of things. And if you believe that narrative, then you are prepared to make statements that says that the earth is boiling. And you will believe somebody that says that. The facts don't bear it out. The sad reality is that one of those other groups that has been criticized for not doing his job has been forestry. And of course, forest communities, they live around the forests, and they have not done those things that were necessary for them to be able to protect themselves. And it's there, the opportunities are there, but they just have not used them. So how can we here in Canada, I mean, we've had some terrible things, and I know people that have lost homes and so on, but we have people that categorically will state that it is all because of climate change. Well, the U.S. doesn't have carbon tax, and this last year has been one of the least severe fire seasons ever. No carbon tax. I mean, I know that that correlation doesn't make sense any more than the correlation makes sense that if you charge a carbon tax, you're going to be able to solve these problems. The correlations don't make sense, but they sure make good clips in the House of Commons. They make pretty good clips when you say, oh, well, this person here is a climate denier. I've had that accusation. All I simply said is, I remember going to Drumheller Valley, looking at a sign that said 10,000 years ago we were under a kilometer of ice. And yeah, there's been global warming. I mean, at that time, we were only under a kilometer of ice. Montreal was under 2 miles of ice. So they had even more hot air there for them to be able to, as things changed. I don't know how many people know about Lake Superior. Wasn't there about 15,000 years ago, but was carved out of the glaciation and the fact that as massive dams of ice broke as the climate started, that it formed the Great Lakes. That's the reality that we have. But nobody pays attention to those things because they'd sooner talk about somebody being a climate denier or this sort of thing. All these things that nobody pays much attention to. So it's kind of important that if we're going to make up policies, that we take a look at all politicians that give that simple argument as to how this can happen and how that can happen. Now, in our case, it's how far down the road are we going to be before we can fix some of the problems that we see. And there are a lot of them. The main one is we have such wealth in this country. We have so many unique innovators in this country. And we've heard, and I can't remember whether it was here in Natural Resources or back in Environment, but there was a group, they built hovercraft in Ontario. And in order to get funding for them to proceed, they had to go through the U.S. And where did they get the funding from? Canada Pension Plan. Okay, so that's where the money came from, for them to go to the States to be able to develop the programming that they had. Well, it seems a little odd to me that we can't figure out a way to make those types of things happen. Nevertheless, that's what we are dealing with when we have ideologically driven leadership because they stop thinking. And then we talk now about how are each and every one of our communities affected by the IRA in the U.S., which Biden has signed on to. And we are expected now to change all of our rules and how our investments, and so, all of the things that are taking place. Well, the first thing that the Biden administration did when they came in was to shut down Keystone XL. Now, when they realized that, oh, you know what, we need a little bit of diesel and we need a few other things, so where are we going to get this from? So they make deals with Venezuela to get their heavy oil. Because again, not a lot of people understand the science of all of this, but it all, if it's heavy oil, it comes out, it has all of the different types of things that you need. It has what you're going to use for asphalt, it's got what you're going to use for diesel, it's got the gasoline, you've got the propane, you've got all these things. It all comes out of one pot. And it's how you deal with it that is important. But we seem to forget that. How much of what we do and what we use is actually coming out of the hydrocarbons that we have. And so, yeah, that's why these different regions get a little upset when someone does not respect those parts of the country that champion these new technologies. And before people just say, oh, well, you don't like the concept of a carbon tax and all this other kind of stuff, because I know I'll get that. Alberta has had a fee for heavy emitters for close to 20 years. But there was no way that each and every one of these businesses could take an amount of money and fix or change efficiently that which they have, that's which they have in their industry. So they put it together into a fund. And that fund, then as it grew, was able to find industry-wide solutions, such as carbon capture, utilization, and storage, such as taking nanoparticles of carbon, putting it into different types of products, whether it be steel or whatever. So those are the things that are done if you are wise. How do you get to the stage where you can afford to be wise? You take a product that you have, you make it the best in the world, you sell it, you get tax dollars to build schools and hospitals in your province. You have tax dollars that go to helping other provinces in this country. You have tax dollars to help with all of the needs that the federal government has. And you have tax incentives and dollars possible to make the environmental aspects of what we have in this country even better. And then what can you do with that? You sell it around the world. What are we going to do with things the way we have set it up? We will chase that innovation out of this country, similar to the hovercraft. We will chase it out of this country, and then we will buy it back from others around the world. Where is the logic? Where is the logic to have other provinces suggest that Alberta is doing all of this damage to the world and that they are going to do all they possibly can to stop them? Where is the advantage to having political parties that believe that, hey, it worked for Greenpeace, it worked for all these other groups, that lots of money comes in if you fight them, so that's what we do again? Where is the advantage? How does that build a nation? As I mentioned earlier, I can see where the Bloc would look at it and say, well, who cares? We don't want you guys building a strong nation. We've got an exit strategy. But it should matter to my friends in Quebec. It should matter to my friends in the Maritimes. It should matter to my friends up north. It should matter to my friends in Ontario. It should matter to my friends in the West. And it should matter to my friends that I have met and spoken with for many years around the world. When I say, if you would just come to Canada, if you would just look at what we produce and how we produce it and why we do it this way, you will be impressed. And that would mean that there is no place better for you to invest. And certainly, if you need products, take a look at Canada and what Canada has to offer. That's where I'm going with what I am saying, because I believe that as such an amazing country with 338 ridings at this point in time that depend so much on oil and gas and its byproducts, as we look at the things we have around this table, the things we wear, all of those things are critical. And why would we want to go someplace else, or to at least not have that opportunity to sell that product and to buy that product? So those are some of the things that I'm extremely concerned about. As I've said, on the world stage, we have lost our way. I can't believe the way in which we are portrayed around the world at this point in time. I have friends that have been, in India, in Asia, and so on. I know when I was on international trade, we spent time with the ASEAN countries and talked to them. This was about the time when the Prime Minister went to India with his family and sort of embarrassed things a little bit. Maybe some people didn't think so, but nevertheless, even Liberals that were with me on that committee, and I won't name names, were scratching their head as to what was taking place. We had the same sort of thing happen with trade developments. So when we talked about CETA, all this Prime Minister had to do, the ball had already been hit out of the park. All he had to do is, when they brought it back to the home plate, is to put his signature on it. That is how far CETA had been. And then, of course, he decides, well, there's a few other things I'd like to see added to this thing, so let's open this up. Same kind of thing happened in Vietnam at the meetings that were there. If I show up on time, it's probably because I've been working on these great things where we are going to add a few more letters to the agreements. And the people that are there look at it and say, well, why? Why would you do that? I thought we were talking about trade. I thought that was the rationale. I thought that was the reason we had. And again, this latest issue, of course, that they're trying to say, oh well, how don't you know that Ukraine has a carbon tax and all this kind of stuff, thinking that they've really found something special to hang their head on? Well, you go from 56-to-1 ratio to 80-some-to-1 ratio. Of course, people know that they had to sign on to an agreement to be part of the EU. But when you take a look at the other aspects of it, and you take a look, and again, back to the history of what happened in Berlin, where Canada was saying, hey, we're going to do this carbon tax, so why don't you guys get on our side and make it so much easier? Or in Birmingham, when they say, well, we've even gone a little further because we've got a Minister of Environment and a Minister of Natural Resources that just love this stuff. So we're going to say that as Canadians, we are going to do all we can to limit the expansion of hydrocarbons, even though it's here in our country and it would really hurt us more than anybody else. So that's really where we're at. So those are the reasons why I am so concerned about how each one of our ridings is going to deal with the issues that are taking place. I look at, again, to go back to what I had said about from the first shovel to dig something up to the last shovel to cover it up. I know that there was a great discussion having to do with farm products, either into biodiesel, ethanol, those types of things. And all I say, that's great. I know that we can do these things. As a matter of fact, probably 30 years ago, I had been approached by a group to commit about 500 acres of barley to a project which would have turned into ethanol. And then you would take the ethanol, you'd move it off, and then you would take the mash that you had from there, you would then feed it to animals, and then you would take the methane that you would have from those animals, and that would help run your system. Two things. First, and it would have probably been useful. The only thing is, to me, it said it would work dependent upon subsidies that we could get from the Alberta government. Well, I look at subsidies like that's my tax dollar, and that's my neighbor's tax dollar. And I can't do something just because it came from my neighbor's tax dollar. It's got to do something on its own. So, and it would have been a neat thing to do, you know, but I didn't feel that that was right to do. I got to the stage where we even, you know, talked about zoning and how we would do all of this stuff, and good idea, but it wasn't the right thing at the right time. So I would have had to have, if I was going to deal with what am I getting out of this, I would have had to have looked at how much fuel I was going to use for this 500 acres of barley that I had to commit. So I would have to treat it exactly the same way and manage it, analyze it exactly the same way as if I was selling it for cattle feed. So I'd have to do that. I'd have to then look at the cost of the facility and the cost of everything else that was associated with that, and the trucking that would be associated. So that was kind of part of the metrics that I looked at. But we need to do that for everything else we do. And if when we say, oh, I think we'll go to Timmins and we'll start digging things up there and everybody's going to be happy. Well, not likely. And we can try and find all of the rare earth minerals around Canada, because not that we can't do it, but at what cost? And right now, if we're still sending coal to China and they're producing and mining in their country, where are we going to buy these things from? We're going to buy them from them because they are part of that supply chain. And as part of that supply chain, we will not be able to compete. We will not be able to compete with the way in which they have taken over African countries and the way in which they get cheap labor in order to produce these products that we all seem excited about having. But we're going to say we're going to do it. And we're going to say that because the U.S. is doing this, we've got to make sure that we get in it as well. So when we have a company, and again, as I mentioned before, sometimes we hear things and we think that we know everything that is there. So I'm going to preface some of this with that. When we hear that companies in Europe, GM as well, GM, Ford, Stellantis, and so on, are actually cutting back on their EV vehicles because of supply chain, because of cost, because of high electricity rates, then you start to wonder, well, this was maybe a good idea, but how do we make it work? How do we measure the environmental impact as we go and do the mining in our region? So we do all of the other things that are there. And we, as Canadians, go over and above everything to make sure that we have satisfied any group that wants to send a brief, to a discussion. So, and we do that. We don't, we encourage it, and so we should actually listen to them when they come. But that's sort of the issue that we have right now, and that makes it kind of difficult for us to proceed. And then when you say, as I mentioned before, if you have billions of dollars of subsidies to these companies, suspect as to how they might get built and by whom, and even if that wasn't the case, still, $15 billion from Canadians for this kind of a project. Wouldn't it be better to look at the strengths that we really have? To take vehicles that, as we have, that have gone from, 10, 12 miles per gallon to 30? Wouldn't that be a better way? And as we purchase this fuel that we have, we put that money into our schools, into our hospitals, into our natural defense, to all of the things that Canadians need. We help out those provinces that, for some reason or another, have a different way of analyzing their balance sheets. I would think that would be a wise thing to do. But how do you do that in a country that pits one group against another? How do you do that when the mandate letters for the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Natural Resources had the vast majority just cut and paste from one to the other? How do you look at a department, and I understand government, they are beholden to the thoughts and ideology of a government. So I understand that's how it's done. But how do we find our way through when this is what we are doing to this wonderful nation of ours? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. We'll now move to Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank my colleague, the member from Red Deer Mountain View, Earl Dreeshen, for just a wonderful explanation as to why we need to consider this sub-amendment. And he really created a great platform to help Canadians that are watching by TV understand what this is really about, and the importance of what the work that this committee does, and the importance of the order in which we do things in this committee, and how important that is. And so thank you, Earl. Thank you for doing that. You've helped, I think, all of us around this table, and certainly those of our viewers that are watching, understand the importance of the work that we're doing here, but the importance also in the sequence of the work that we're doing. So getting back to the sub-amendment, which was to make sure that this committee will be hearing from witnesses from Timmins James Bay. Someone might ask the questions, why Timmins James Bay? What would be so important about Timmins James Bay? Why do we need to hear those witnesses? And it's quite simple. Timmins James Bay has a lot of natural resource activity in that particular constituency of the country, and I acknowledge there's 338 constituencies in Canada, many of whom have natural resources. Mr. Dreeshen talked very articulately about the natural resource sector in Alberta and northern Alberta, but Timmins James Bay has forestry, and they've got lots of mining there, and you know, some of the bigger mines there, the Elmer Gold Project, the Victor Mine, lots of the big names we hear fairly regularly. You know, they come to Ottawa, they solicit tax dollars for considerations. But there's a lot of other people, and the concern is that we're going to be looking after labor there. And that's why they want to discuss these bills, both C-50 and 49, and they cite the concern is we want to make sure that labor is properly addressed there. And we know there's labor involved in mining activities. But I also want to point out to folks that are watching and to this committee that there's lots of junior miners that we never hear about that also have employees that also need to be able to count on that paycheck coming every 2 weeks, that they can feed their families, that they can heat their homes, that they can put fuel into their vehicles. All things that have been very, very negatively impacted, Mr. Chair, by carbon tax. We've seen the price of all of those things significantly increase by carbon tax. And it's interesting that this Liberal government carved out a geographical area of our country and gave them a carbon tax exemption or holiday. Very interesting, because apparently it's an ideological platform of this government to have a carbon tax. And now they've carved out for a geographical area, Atlantic Canada, to carve out a carbon tax exemption to make life more affordable. All the other areas of Canada did not receive that same exemption, and they didn't receive it because they're heating with more fuel-efficient methods like hydroelectricity or natural gas from Alberta. And so, but they experienced the same cost increases of carbon tax, and yet they did not get the benefit of that carve-out exemption that was provided to Atlantic Canadians. And we know the reason that happened, and that's because the Prime Minister's polling numbers were plummeting in Atlantic Canada, and he tried to address that by throwing them, as we would call it in the industry, throwing them a bone. You know, maybe keep them happy, maybe get their support back on side here. But there's people in Timmins James Bay that experience the same increased cost of living, cost of heating their homes, cost of putting fuel in their vehicles, cost of buying groceries at the grocery store, impacted by the carbon tax. And that's no small matter here, and I think that's something that this committee should be seized with, the cost that carbon tax has added to everyday living. So I just want to actually list some of the junior miners that find themselves domiciled in Timmins James Bay. And I went on the internet to get a list of the junior mining companies in Timmins James Bay, and I'd like to just make mention of them, because that's why we need witnesses from these mining companies. Patriot Battery Metals, Osisco Mining, Lift Power, Critical Elements, Lithium Royalty, Brunswick Exploration, Fury Gold Mines, Arbor Metals, Azimuth Exploration, Benz Mining, Power Nickel, Midland Exploration, Vanstar Mining, Max Power Mining, Superior Mining, Champion Electric Metals, Ophir Gold, Consolidated Lithium Metals, Hertz Lithium, Comet Lithium, Sirius Resources, Battery Metals, Targa Exploration, Harfang Exploration, Quebec Precious Metals, Canadian Critical Minerals, Lithium One Metals, Axel Resources, Stelmine, Dios Exploration, Niobe Metals, Madero Mining, Opus One Gold, Green Bay Minerals, Green Battery Minerals, Mosaic Minerals, Stria Lithium, Genius Metals, Spod Lithium, Metalix Ventures, Battery X Metals, Tom Tama Gold, Clarity Metals, Slam Exploration, Durango Resources, Lancaster Resources, Rockland Resources, Arctic Fox Lithium, K9 Gold, QCX Gold, Bullion Gold Resources, and then Victory Battery Metals, Brigadier Gold, Lithium Leon Metals, Musk Metals, Battery Metals, Megawatt Metals, Fabled Copper, Nordic Resources, and Q2 Metals. That's the listing that you can find on the internet, Mr. Chairman, about junior mining companies in the James Bay area. There's a whole host of them there, and all of these mining companies have employees that work in that area that are dependent on their paychecks. And what we do in this committee matters. It matters greatly, and that's why it's so important to hear from them. But then we need to also go back and look at all the platform that this premise is based on, of why we need to reconsider very carefully whether we're addressing things in the right order here. And we know that the Supreme Court issued a reference on Bill C-69, which is the impact assessment legislation that this government passed, which was also been referred to in industry as a No More Pipelines bill. And we know that there was a referral that struck down about 80 to 85% of that bill as being non-charter compliant or constitutionally challenged. And so this committee should be seized, absolutely seized, with getting that legislation back here to committee and identifying the areas that the Supreme Court has referred to as not being compliant with the Constitution, and looking at those areas and correcting them if they can be correcting them. I suspect in a lot of instances we're going to have to just discard big segments of that bill because it just doesn't pass the litmus test. And I think it would be very wise of us to conduct a study on that bill first and to bring in witnesses from Timmins, James Bay, and see how that particular piece of legislation has impacted their companies, impacted their employees, because the Supreme Court says that it doesn't work. And then also the federal court that recently ruled that the ban on single-use plastics also wasn't constitutional. And I know that the NDP Liberal government is moving ahead with contesting that further and challenging that decision. I think that would be a very I know it is a very welcome decision from the federal court. You know, Mr. Speaker, I get or Mr. Chairman, sorry, you're not a speaker yet. That day may come, but not today. You know, I get into my riding very late in the evening when we're done here in Ottawa, and I kind of like to treat myself. I like to swing through McDonald's on the way home and pick up a strawberry milkshake. And
Easy.
I got about an hour and a quarter drive to my home from the airport. And so I do that quite frequently. And I was reminded again this last week when I went home, I put that paper straw into a strawberry milkshake and started sucking. And well, that just doesn't work so well. It doesn't, you know, you got to look at cost benefit and to have a paper straw and trying to, the suction that you need to get that strawberry milkshake, that triple thick strawberry milkshake from McDonald's, up the straw and into your palate, that takes an incredible amount of work. And so we very much welcome the decision from the federal court to strike down this straw ban, plastic straw ban. And I think that's going to be welcome for Canadians as they go to have their strawberry milkshakes, which I think are an important staple here in our Canadian diet.
Extra fiber from that straw, too.
And so both of these decisions are important to this committee, and I think our committee should be consumed with addressing these two pieces of, well, one is a regulation that came out of cabinet, I suppose, the straw ban, but certainly the decision of the Supreme Court on C-69 is something that this committee should be bringing back and studying. And why is it important to prioritize that? And that's because both Bill C-49 and C-50, which the Liberals have proposed as the next pieces of legislation on our work schedule here at this committee, both of them reference Bill C-69. And if they're referencing a flawed piece of legislation, then we know in turn that legislation is also flawed. And so I think that gives lots of reason why we should be prioritizing the study of Bill C-69 over C-49, over C-50, because let's get C-69 right, or let's actually recall all of C-69 and let's discard it, and then let's present legislation to this committee that will give Atlantic Canada a regulatory platform for tidal power, or you know, we could talk more about C-50, what was at one time called the just transition, and then the industry referred to it more as an unjust transition, which probably more adequately describes the intent of that bill. And the Liberal government, in an effort to try and save face, renamed that bill Sustainable Jobs. Well, the sustainable jobs, Mr. Chairman, are already there. And they're there in oil and gas. They're providing above average income levels for the families involved in that industry, in the production of the world's cleanest and safest fuels by way of diesel fuel, gas, aviation fuel, and also liquefied natural gas as well. And I might add, you know, when this Liberal government came to power back in 2015, there were 18 LNG projects on the board. And you know how many of them have actually been built and are in production at capacity? Zero. Yeah. Zero projects completed. That's important for Canadians to know that this Liberal government has either been the cause of these projects being cancelled, and certainly, if not cancelled, not being completed. And meanwhile, the Americans, and we refer to them a lot around this committee when we talk about the IRA, and to folks watching by TV, the IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden has implemented in the United States. It's a massive spending bill, and we're always seeming to want to compete with that piece of legislation on the Canadian side. And I don't know why we're so eager to race to the bottom, as Joe Biden is. But for whatever reason, that's the direction that the Liberal government has decided to pursue. But in spite of their IRA, and in spite of the massive spending and tax credit regime that they've created south of the 49th parallel, in spite of that, they've still had almost half a dozen LNG projects built and completed. And the opportunities that Canada had in Europe and Japan to sell our liquefied natural gas coming from the cleanest processing plants that the world would have known, because our gas and oil industry has got the cleanest and safest energy model. Instead of us being able to capitalize and sell to places like Germany, the rest of Europe, and Japan, our clean LNG products, it's now being sold by the Americans. And there's another opportunity that has been missed by this government, while all at the same time wanting to so desperately compete on so many levels with the American government on their IRA. And I guess another example of that is the massive amounts, the billions of dollars. I think it's close to $31 billion that this government has committed to large multinational corporations that want to build battery production facilities here in Canada. And we're going to be giving them $31 billion of taxpayers' money. And I think Canadians need to understand what this Liberal government has committed here, because it is no small sum, and it will create some jobs. By the way, of which 1,600 we're told now will come from Asian countries as temporary foreign workers. I don't think when when Canadians were first told about the investment into these lithium battery manufacturers, I don't think that they were told that these temporary foreign workers were going to be the mainstay of the employee workforce. And that's something that we haven't seen complete integrity and openness from this government on. But that's come to light now that many of these workers that are going to be employed in these battery plants that are being built on taxpayer dollars here in Canada are actually going to be foreign nationals. And so that's another aspect of trying to compete with the Americans on their IRA, on their Inflation Reduction Act. And I think, Mr. Chairman, that that's just a race to the bottom. I think we as Canada here are incredibly blessed with our God-given natural resources, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's in our mining sector, whether it's in our forestry, all the things that this committee should really be studying. And we need to develop these resources. They weren't given to us just to keep in the ground and stay buried on and covered up in a pile of dirt. No, we have these resources. We've been given these resources to be stewards of these resources and to be good stewards of them. And I think industry, the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, they've shown that they're responsible and that they are good stewards of the resources that we have here in this country. And we've got a phenomenal amount. We're the envy of the world. And we've also got clean water. We've probably got the largest amount of clean water resource on the globe. And I think our natural resource companies have been great stewards in protecting the integrity of our clean freshwater resource that we also have here. But there's mining that needs to happen, and we know that C-69 has made mining very, very difficult, and it's happening in Timmins, James Bay. With the regulatory process that's necessary to open up new mines, to continue to further develop existing mines, it's very, very difficult, and that is something that needs to be studied. You know, just recently someone pointed out to me, and it's not a recent fact, it's an age-old fact, that when we look at the air that we breathe, the composition of that air, we hear so much about carbon, and we need to reduce the carbon input, and we're responsible for creating all this carbon pollution everywhere. It was pointed out to me that in the air that we breathe, 78% of that air is nitrogen, 21% is oxygen. So that's 99% of the air that we breathe is comprised of nitrogen and oxygen. The other 1% is comprised of argon and carbon. 0.03% is carbon. And if it's true, and I don't have the data to show that it's true, but some folks say that the impact of the carbon in the air could be manipulated by about 20% by human activity. And if that's true, then it would be 0.006 of 1%. That's 6/1000ths of a percent of impact that all human activity could actually have on the quality of the air we breathe in relation to carbon. So those are things that we need to consider before we light our hair on fire talking about carbon pollution. And do we still want to reduce pollution? Absolutely we do. Do we still want to find out more efficient ways to burn hydrocarbons? And we've seen the industry really step up and do that. When we've seen miles per gallon per vehicle significantly increase in the last 2 decades. I remember growing up in the 70s, and I'm a little behind my colleague Earl from Red Deer here. He grew up in the 60s. I grew up in the 70s. And I was really fond of muscle cars, and some of the muscle cars that I owned at that time, I very first one I ever bought when I was 16 was a 1970 Mustang Mach 1 351 Cleveland automatic. It was beautiful. It had a shaker hood. It had the louvers on the rear window. It was blue and black accents. It was a wonderful car. But you know what? I would have been very lucky in those days to get 15 miles to the gallon. Very, very lucky. I had an awful lot of fun burning those gas for those 15 miles for every gallon that I did drive. But we have cars being produced today with the same amount of horsepower or more that will get 30 miles to the gallon. And that's a testament to industry, to where technology has come. And so we've reduced the amount of hydrocarbons that we consume for the same amount of horsepower that we create. And whether that's in gasoline-powered engines or diesel-powered engines, and we know this carbon tax is particularly burdensome on our transportation industry, who are some of the heaviest users of diesel fuel in our country. We know that every semi-truck driving down the highway is burning diesel fuel. And the construction industry also is consumed with heavy equipment.
J'aurais un point d'ordre rapide, Monsieur le Président. Juste,
We have a point of order from Monsieur Simard. Monsieur Simard, go ahead.
simplement par
Yes, a point of order. Just out of curiosity, I would ask my good colleague Ted. I certainly understand that he appreciates drinking his strawberry milkshake through a plastic straw and that he likes muscle cars. But what is the link between all of this and the sub-amendment? I would like to hear what the link to the sub-amendment is. These fancy cars and these plastic straws. Maybe I just haven't got it, but please tell. Do tell.
Simard, for your point of order, Mr. Falk, I would just ask to keep it relevant to the sub-amendment. I know your passion for lots of things over the years, but if we could keep it to the sub-amendment that you actually brought forward. So
okay,
thank you. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you for focusing me again, Mr. Chairman, and the fact that Mr. Simard brought up my muscle cars just made me think back of the 70 Challenger Hemi that I bought, which I had for a period of time, the big block Chevelle convertible. Just phenomenal. And then I bought a Vega, Chevrolet Vega, that somebody had wedged a little 327 Chevy in there. That thing just went like a bandit. And so, yeah, that really refocused my thoughts on my little diversion there on muscle cars. And what that has to do was on the fact that the industry here that we have in Canada that's using our natural resources is becoming more and more efficient, because I was talking about the amount of hydrocarbons that I was burning back in the 70s. And now, with the technology that we have today making the same amount of horsepower, we're using about half of the fuel that we did before. Half of the fuel. That's amazing. And why is that important? Because if we're burning half the fuel, we need to produce half as much, or we can sell that much more. And whether it's in the oil and gas industry, or whether it's in the forest industry, or whether it's in mining, which is what we have in Timmins, James Bay, we know that if we can become more efficient users of the natural resources that we have, they're going to last longer. And they're also going to create less emissions. And I think creating targets that are reasonable and sustainable is important. We know that this Liberal government, in spite of the carbon tax, which was supposed to be a cure-all for everything, hasn't met any of their emissions targets, and that's unfortunate, except for the 1 year when during COVID, when nobody was driving or moving anything. But what we need to do is to protect our natural resource industry. And I know there's lots of advances in technology, and I know that solar and wind are important, and I know that that's the direction that C50 would like to take the natural resource industry here in Canada. And it was interesting because we had Industry on the Hill here last week, and there were industry representatives, and I went to one of the receptions, and I was talking to one of the producers there. And they were boasting about how their whole facility was solar powered. And they showed me these rows on rows of solar panels. And I said, wow, like that's very interesting. Yeah, and we do, they said we do have a connection to the grid in case of the solar system not being able to provide enough energy to properly run our plants here. And I said, and the question I asked this young lady was, I said, so if there wouldn't have been a subsidy to have installed these solar panels up front, would it be economically viable to be using solar energy versus the hydro energy that we have in Manitoba? And the answer was no. So the only way a lot of this stuff works is if we take tax dollars and subsidize it. And I think we have to look seriously whether that's the direction that we need to go. Do we want everybody else to pay to subsidize our reduced energy bills? I don't know if that's fair. I don't think it's the right way to do it. And my point with talking about muscle cars and where that whole industry has evolved to today is that as time moves along, industry and technology advances to the point where we become more efficient. And I think over time in the energy industry, that happens as well. But when we force it to happen the way it is, there's nothing efficient about it, and it takes huge amounts of tax dollars to achieve the results that we do. Whereas I believe we'll get the same results. We'll get the same results at the end of the day if we allow these things to naturally progress, if we allow industry and technology to use our resources responsibly and to create our desired results using less of them. And I think we can do that. And so we know that that there's lots of things that we need to consider when we're studying these bills here at committee. And I just think that that if we get representation in here from the mining industry in particular, from the Timmins James Bay constituency, we're going to hear reports from these miners and company owners that talk about how difficult it is for these junior miners to start up and how absolutely necessary the products that they produce are. And they're actually very, I listed several of the junior mining companies in the list that I provided for committee just a few moments ago. You could see there were several of these miners are lithium miners. Lithium is a project that is required in the production and development of the batteries that need to power our electrified economy and these batteries that we want to make in Stellantis and Volkswagen. And I think Ford is considering something as well. And so it's important that we hear from witnesses from Timmins James Bay and about how they'll feel about it. And not only on the labor side. I think the labor side is very important. We want to make sure that that Canadians can bring home powerful paychecks and that they can keep a higher percentage of those paychecks in their pockets and not have to pay them through increased costs related to the carbon tax with the higher cost of groceries, the higher cost of home heating, the higher cost of fuel in their vehicles. And so with powerful paychecks, we're going to build a powerful economy that is going to continue to drive the welfare of our country. And we're also going to be able to see our export markets expand. And we know that Europe has got a huge market for us. There's 500 million people part of the CETA trade pact that we have there that we have access to with the free trade agreement. And we can access these people with our natural resource products here. And we've got lots to offer them, whether it's LNG or whether it's our clean hydrocarbon diesel fuel and gas, whether it's forest products or whether it's the lithium that comes from the mines, the cobalt, the uranium, all the stuff that we need and that other countries need that we have. And we have that here. We need to be responsible with how we're going to develop these resources. C-69 was an abject failure in that regard. It got nothing done. It made it burdensome for the industry. It created just a untenable situation for anything to happen in the natural resource sector. And I think that's something that we can improve on. There's a reason that this committee should be looking at C-69. And it should also be looking at the decision on plastics, like I said before, because of the importance of milkshakes and other things. But this committee needs to be working on legislation that the courts have said is not constitutionally compliant. It's absolutely important that we do that, especially if we think we should be studying legislation that references failed legislation. we need to get it right on C69. We needed to get it right on the regulation from the Liberal cabinet on the single-use plastics. And I think those are the issues that this committee should be seized with and should be studying. I might also want to add things. No, you know what? I'm going to save that. I think I'm going to, Mr. Chair. I think I've made my point. Why it's important that that we're going to hear from witnesses from Timmins James Bay, in forestry, in mining, because of the products that they produce, and also because of how important it is to our studies. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think I've made a good argument, and I really, I've heard from several committee members why they're not going to support my sub-amendment. I don't know why they wouldn't want to get witnesses in from Timmins James Bay. Like, what do these folks have against folks that live in Timmins James Bay? Why wouldn't we want to hear from them and hear what's important to them?
Thank you, Mr. Falk, for your intervention on this important debate on the sub-amendment. I just want to make sure that anybody has lost track of where we are, that we have had a motion presented on the floor by Mr. Cerbrera. We had an amendment placed after that, and we've had a sub-amendment placed on Timmins James Bay by Mr. Falk, and Mr. Falk has just concluded his intervention on that. Now, colleagues, we are approaching 1 p.m. Mr. Patzer, you are next on the floor to engage and speak, but I think because we are very close, I do not want to interrupt you once you begin. So, colleagues, I think we should suspend the meeting for the remainder of today and for the next 2 minutes or so, and we will conclude with Mr. Patzer having the floor on Wednesday. Suspended.
Mm-hmm.